Chapter 2. Today's Date. "What's the bad news?" Jonathan asked, faking his concern. "The bad news is that we couldn't find any viable info on you." This truly was bad news. If citizens of the sect found him more suspicious than he already was, this could raise an alarm about his character. Then what's the good news? The shinobi that was here earlier felt bad, so he decided to pay for your medical costs. He also said he would come visit you when he gets back. This was far from good news for Jonathan. He knew Mateo's personality very well. He had a very humble heart and treated people with respect. Why this wasn't good news was because Mateo would care to do some research on who and where Jonathan came from. "Oh," Jonathan said, feigning his true thoughts. He then lowered his head to consider things. The medical ninja mistook his gesture. She tried to comfort him with words, so he played along with a fake smile. "You look hungry. I'll get you something to eat. I'll be right back." "Wait," he announced before his caretaker left hurriedly. "When will Mateo be back?" Jonathan needed to know this crucial information. The medical ninja wasn't completely sure and estimated Mateo would probably be back around dusk. Believing to have soothed his anxiety, she left the room. He knew that if Mateo, a colonel, were to investigate him any further, it would make him look too suspicious. He knew of Mateo's capabilities, so he closed the blinds and checked around his clothes and skin to make sure there were no black tattoos. Mateo's special ability was to mark any surface with just a touch and then instantly teleport to that marked location. This is how Jonathan and him were able to traverse to the hospital so quickly. What makes his ability so deadly isn't that he could move at the speed of light, but that once he marks a target with a tattoo, that tattoo becomes permanent. If Jonathan needed to become the strongest ninja in this world, his plans required him to covertly operate with as little information about him as possible. And there was only one sure method for doing so. Firstly, Jonathan needed to learn how to perform techniques. Secondly, he needed to strengthen his body to perfect this world's method of fighting, known as martial arts. Learning how to hone weapons wouldn't be a bad choice either, but countering them was more of a necessity. Even though Jonathan had dropped the main series years ago, his memories of some of the more important details were still intact. Though the possibility of this world being the same as what he knew on Earth wasn't completely known yet. Assuming it was the same, any other timeline in this world might have been too vague or too complicated for him to work with. For in this era, the main character had yet to be born, and there were a lot of events that would more or less still need to occur beforehand. The ninja world is comprised of various methods of fighting, but the main method is performing techniques, powerful skills that used the elements in the body or around the environment. To perform a technique, one needs to harness a substance called energy. It can be found in people and even plants. Those who can perfectly harness and manipulate energy can become shinobi, another word for a male ninja. With energy, one can essentially do anything in this world. They can use illusion techniques to create illusions, or sword techniques to perfect their sword skills. There were a variety of ways a shinobi could fight in this world, but there was one main thing he absolutely had to acquire to enact his true plans. Jonathan returned to his bed after checking that Mateo hadn't left a mark on him. He then reopened the blinds and unlocked the windows. A cool breeze blew into the room as he looked at where he was. To the far right, he could see the Tree Sect's monumental mountain. This mountain had all the names of the current and former leaders of the sect. Mateo Keegan's name had yet to be constructed, so Jonathan's deduction earlier was correct. Everything he had learned over the years of being a fan of Neo was being shown to him like a theme park. Being on one of the top floors of the hospital, he could even see the word Inferno on the Academy's building. Not a single detail was missed. Whether it was from playing in its virtual world in multiple video game titles, or role-playing with his friends, he was quite familiar with all of his surroundings. But there was one place he had his sights set on, and being in this hospital was not one of them. Just as he was arranging his thoughts, He noticed a mirror by his bedside. Picking up the mirror, he wasn't at all astonished that his physical features remained the same, all except his eye color, which had become viridescent. Aside from that, he looked exactly like he did almost 20 years ago. Both his hair color and his skin tone matched. Before he could figure out what this could mean, the door opened. He placed the mirror down, turning to see a new face wearing a regular nurse's uniform walk in with a rolling table. On it, there were bandages, other medical tools, and a bowl of soup. "Sorry for barging in," the nurse said in a soft tone. "My name's Ikitsumi." Ikitsumi looked like some medical intern from Earth. "Lady Shanice got really busy and told me to bring this to your room. Sorry to hear about your amnesia," she casually addressed. That name, Shanice, he remembered. She was the medical ninja who assisted in the main character's birth. He could only think that the reason a medical ninja came to treat an average boy who wasn't even a shinobi was because Mateo Keegan personally brought that boy in. I'm no different than a side character at the moment. Most side characters in the franchise never had any significant roles to play anyway. Is this world filling those characters in, or is this world different from the one I watched back home? He kept his deductions to himself as the nurse patched up his head with new bandages. But how do I get back home? He knew that powerful techniques to traverse different dimensions existed. Yet, to perform things like that, he'd need to be equivalent to the main character, or the main villain. Knowing that it was trivial to be a righteous character in this world, he had no problem taking on the villain mantle. Jonathan looked at Ikitsumi as she continued mending his injury. Making eye contact, she gave him a warm smile with her eyes closed. Even if Jonathan was fast enough to slay this unknown nurse, he knew this wasn't some manhwa where the main character was gifted a system to help guide them. He had no friends here, no family. He would be striving for himself after every act. If he decided to become an enemy of the world in order to return home, he'd not only accept that role, he'd be doing things on his own. As far as he understood, he was born only a few moments ago in a child's body that closely resembled his own. That did not mean he was at a disadvantage. He was calm throughout because, in his heart, he believed this was the real ninja world he was familiar with. There was too much evidence to refute that notion. That also meant he'd be the only one to know almost everyone and everything, having vast supremacy over all the events and characters that he'd likely encounter one day. He knew the story well. He wasn't some cosplay fanatic who collected comic books. He was an average fan who had followed their series for 9 years. As long as he didn't obscure too many things, his knowledge of what should happen next would be one of his biggest weapons. The only issue is that he stopped following the series more than 8 years ago. His memories might have been better than most individuals, but he didn't have an eidetic one. He looked at his bowl of soup and recognized it as ramen. This would be his first time trying food not from another country, but from another world. Grabbing his chopsticks, he slowly ate his meal. Ikitsumi stared at him as he swallowed his noodles. "It's good," Jonathan said after seeing her eager look. She jumped joyously at his response, saying, "That's great. I cooked it myself, after all." She then winked before giving him a thumbs up. "I thought you were a nurse," he said. The atmosphere quickly changed as Ikitsumi relaxed, trying to keep her smile. "Well, you see, the war just ended and our hospital didn't have much staff, so I had to." Before she could finish her sentence, he interrupted, "What? What month are we in?" His sudden question startled her a little. "We're in the month of October. October 27th, to be exact. Today's the day Jackie Lee, a great martial arts fighter, will be born." Jonathan only knew this because that character had been one of his favorites before he stopped following the series. He knew just about everything related to his favorite characters as well as their respective families. But that's not what alarmed him. The fact that the war had recently ended meant that Mateo would be named Tree Lord soon. Worst of all was the event that followed after that. The dire wolf would attack the sect. The dire wolf is a monstrous creature. And what was so dangerous about it was that it was 91 meters tall. It was highly unlikely for him to get strong enough in less than a year's time through standard methods. He hadn't even learned how to control energy. The nurse saw the annoyed look on his face. She couldn't tell what he was thinking. Not a second too soon, he calmly smiled, saying, "Thanks. I thought knowing the date might help me remember something." Ikitsumi smiled in relief. She tried giving reassuring words to him, but he had hardly paid any attention. The only thing he was thinking of was how to escape this hospital in order to head to the only place where his plans could unfold. "I'll let you rest for a little bit, and we'll check on you often, okay?" Jonathan could only nod with a slight smile on his face. "And if you'd like, you can take off your sandals and place them on the side." The moment the door shut, his smile turned to resentment. He quickly uncovered his sheets and stood to look out the window. Even if he were back on Earth in his more athletic body, he'd never attempt climbing down a room this absurdly high. And he hadn't yet harnessed energy, so wall climbing, which was possible, was not an option. He wasn't a prodigy like Delph, nor did he have Icarus Archon's talents, another genius that took the series by storm. Jonathan was just an average boy. Without daring to waste any more time, he opened the doors to his room. The halls were considerably quiet, since it was still early in the morning. He looked around and didn't see anyone. Remembering what the nurse mentioned earlier, they were currently understaffed. He therefore exited his room casually. When he walked past an open door to a patient's room, he couldn't help but notice the patient was a shinobi. He knew this to be true because of the universal thick sweater most shinobi above a certain rank wore. What grabbed Jonathan's attention the most was what was next to the shinobi, his weapon pouch. How can I be sure he's sleeping, though? Before Jonathan could act, he heard two women talking just one room away. So he quickly slid right into the shinobi's room before slightly closing it. Whether or not he'd be caught in the act, he already had a story in place to prove his innocence. He had also recognized both ladies' voices. Ikitsumi was talking to Shanice, who ordered her to take some blankets upstairs. The shinobi in the room was also still sleeping soundly, almost as if he was unconscious. "Be sure to check up on that boy that Lord Keegan brought in earlier." "I will, Lady Shanice. I feel so bad for him." Jonathan squinted his eyes when he heard those words. Characters he had no emotional attachment to made him utterly contemptuous. They also called Mateo a lord, despite him not having been inaugurated as the Tree Lord yet. When the ladies walked away, he turned to see sleeping pills by the bedside. Picking them up to read the contents, he heard snoring. Whoever this shinobi was, he was undoubtedly sound asleep. So Jonathan picked up his weapons pouch. This shinobi's weapon pouch could pave the way for him to return to the world where he's from. To him, this wouldn't even be an act of stealing, considering the situation he was in. After taking the weapons pouch and leaving, there was only one thing going on in his mind. A shinobi who left their items lying around deserved for them to be taken. In but a moment's time, he made it to the stairs and walked casually down to the first floor while hiding the pouch. He would pass a couple staff members, but not a single one of them stopped him. Whether it was because he was a young boy that didn't arouse suspicion, he was prepared to give them an answer if he were to be questioned. When he finally descended the flights of stairs and made it to the first floor, he knew just walking out the front entrance was not going to be acceptable. He didn't like the idea, but he was in the world of ninjas. Playing that role was inevitable. Finding an open room near the back of the hospital, he entered it and opened the window. He then forced his small body up the windowsill, allowing him to climb out safely. Jonathan neither walked nor ran. He kept a steady pace so as to look as casual as possible in case anyone noticed him. The tree sect wasn't a complex territory. Once someone located the main road, it was a straight path to the sect gates. From all the years of free roaming in Neo's virtual games, walking on the streets of the tree sect was as familiar as walking on his university campus. The dirt underneath his soles felt hard, and the wind blowing through his clothes left an unsightly sensation. As he walked along the main path, he searched for what was in the pouch he had taken earlier. Inside, he found only 3 kunai. And in a small compartment, he found about 10 or so sharp steel needles. They were acupuncture needles used for throwing. But aside from that, what most interested him was the tree sect's gold garland. A metal garland was given to every ninja after graduating from their respective sect's academy. Not even on Earth, where they were sold nominally, had he ever held one before. He took the gold garland out and tied it around his arms. It was heavy. Already past the ice cream shop, he would just need to continue forward. He had even passed the back alley he woke up in, and though he was desperate, he knew trying to go back there would likely be pointless. From what Jonathan remembered, the tree sect left its gates open for travelers and merchants during the day. The war was also over, so now was the perfect time to leave. Only the sect guards would take notice, but sneaking past them would prove to be improbable. He was prepared for such cases. Unlike others, he thought more than 5, no, 10 steps ahead of his enemies. If the hospital made a report and the guards linked that report to a child walking freely out the gates, they'd undoubtedly know where to locate him. But if that same child was instead a ninja, they'd be puzzled. This was because the destination he was headed to was the tree sect orphanage. The orphanage was the perfect place for a small child with no home or family to go to. He couldn't live like Neogenesis, whose support and income came from the third tree lord. But as long as Jonathan gained access to this specific orphanage, he could live in safety. More importantly, he could freely be taught healing techniques.
Wish to read along while you listen? Be sure to follow us on our social media platform for the latest news.